When the sky closed in, there was a time when Juniper, a scrappy alley cat with soot-colored fur, believed the world ended at the edge of the concrete lot behind the liquor store. That was her entire world: oil stains, broken glass, and the distant hum of passing cars. She wasn't born there, but pain has a way of erasing origin stories. At night, she curled into herself under a sagging cardboard box, eyes wide open, ears twitching at every sound. Hunger gnawed, loneliness pressed down like a second skin. She had been chased, kicked, forgotten. So she stopped trusting warmth, stopped believing in soft voices. Freedom, to her, wasn't something you ran toward, it was something you stopped hoping for when hope became dangerous. Then one night, the sky cracked open, not with thunder, but with silence. A large crow landed near her box. Its feathers shimmered like ink in moonlight. It didn't speak right away. It just watched. "You're not broken," the crow finally said. Juniper stared. She hadn't heard her name in months, let alone a sentence meant just for her. "You're buried," it said gently. "There's a difference." Something shifted. Not much, just enough to make her listen instead of run. What if survival wasn't the end of her story? What if there was more beyond the fear, beyond the shadows she'd learned to live inside? That question, simple as it was, clawed its way into her. And so began Juniper's journey, not just out of the alley, but out of the lie that she wasn't worthy of rescue. Let's follow her path, not to escape the darkness, but to discover what light still waits within it. 1. The fence that wasn't locked. Finn had once known grass, real grass, not the patches of dying weeds clawing through gravel. He used to chase fireflies in the cool dusk of Midwest summers, paws thudding across open fields behind a farmhouse that smelled like wood smoke and bread. But that life had slipped through the cracks like a dream you forget before morning. Now, he lived behind a tall wooden fence, tethered by a short, frayed rope to a bent metal stake, forgotten in the back lot of a junkyard. He spent his days lying beside rusted engine blocks and nights curled beneath a half-crushed camper shell. Rain pooled under his ribs. Winter wind sliced through him like a blade. Sometimes he barked. Sometimes he didn't bother. What was the point? No one came. Not anymore. He stopped hoping when the man who fed him vanished without explanation. The silence that followed was worse than hunger. Then one morning, just before dawn, a voice whispered through the fence, "You're not made for rust and rope." Finn blinked. A crow was perched on the edge of a cracked satellite dish, its feathers deep as ink. "You're not broken," it said, "just buried." Finn turned away. He'd heard voices before his own, mostly. Voices that said he'd missed his chance, that no one was coming, that this was all he deserved. But that night, something cracked. Not the fence. Something inside. The cold came hard, harder than usual. His body shook, and a thought pierced through the numbness. "I can't survive one more winter like this." He stood. The rope pulled. He sat back down, then stood again. It wasn't the fence that held him, it was everything he'd come to believe about himself. "You don't need strength," the crow said softly from the shadows. "You need to stop waiting for permission." The next morning, he chewed the rope. It tasted like metal and mold. His teeth bled. Still, he kept going. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't brave. It was desperate, but it was real. When the final thread gave out, Finn didn't run. He walked, limping, slow, but forward. The gate wasn't locked. It never had been. By noon, he found himself standing on the shoulder of a country road. Wind in his ears. No plan. Just the sky above, the dirt below, and a space in his chest that hadn't felt open in years. "Why now?" he asked the crow, who glided above him like a shadow stitched to light. "Because now," the crow answered. "You believed it was possible." Finn didn't reply. He didn't need to. The wind already knew. The road already knew. And for the first time, so did he. But even in the deepest despair, something unexpected began to shift. 2. The chance left unlocked. Milo had stopped keeping track of time. Somewhere between the third thunderstorm and the 50th sunrise, the days melted into each other like colors left too long in the rain. He was a goat, once strong, sure-footed, proud. Now he was little more than skin and bones. chained to a cracked stone post on the outskirts of a rundown farm. Far off any road people still cared about. The humans there didn't speak to humanly at him. Feedings were sparse. Water came in rusted buckets, half-filled and always late. He had tried to escape once. Just once. The bruises still hummed beneath his fur. He no longer looked beyond the fence. What would be the point? The world had shrunk to the length of his chain and the dull ache in his legs. There was nothing beyond that post but more disappointment. Or so he believed. Then came the storm. It had roared in suddenly, as summer storms, dongri wind, sideways rain, and a sky torn wide open with light. The workers forgot to lock the gate. Milo noticed it the next morning, when the rain had stopped and the world smelled like wet soil and newness. The wooden gate hung crooked, open just a few inches. That's all. A few inches. But even freedom, when you're not ready for it, can feel like a trap. He stared at the opening, frozen. His heart pounded. Every instinct screamed, run. But another voice inside whispered, what if they catch you again? What if it's worse this time? You thinking too much, came a voice above. Milo looked up. A crane, tall and still as stone, stood on the fence post, feathers streaked with white and ash. You're waiting for certainty. That's not how freedom works. I'm tired, Milo murmured, surprising even himself. I know, the crane said, but tired doesn't mean done. The wind nudged the gate wider. The chain on Milo's leg had loosened. He had lost weight more than he realized. With trembling hooves, he shifted his weight, pulled forward. The metal clinked, resisted, then slid off. He stumbled. His legs didn't remember this kind of movement, but he kept going. Each step past that gate felt like betrayal to the fear that had kept him safe, to the pain that had defined him. The sky, though still gray, didn't feel quite so heavy. Behind him, the crane flew beside his shadow, silent. Milo didn't know where the road led. He didn't care. What mattered was that he was on it. Why help me? He asked as the fence grew smaller behind them. Because you reminded me, the crane replied, that even broken things still move toward light. Milo didn't answer, but for the first time in a long while, he wasn't thinking about escape. He was thinking about arrival. Yet freedom, once chosen, doesn't come without a fight. 3. Running through the storm. Kota had never liked rain. It blurred the edges of the world and made everything colder than it already was. But on this night, as the thunder cracked above the hills and sheets of rain slammed into the earth, he didn't have a choice. He ran. His legs burned. His lungs wheezed. The ground was slick with mud and tangled roots, each one trying to pull him back. Behind him, the voices of the hunter, sharp, angry, relentless. In front of him, only fog. He hadn't always been a runaway. Kota, a young fox with amber fur dulled by grime, had once belonged to a traveling petting zoo. He was the main attraction, tame enough to pet, small enough to cage. For years, he smiled on cue, allowed himself to be poked and picked up, and learned how to survive in stillness. But when the circus shut down, he was sold off to a private collector who kept him in a metal box behind a warehouse, on the outskirts of town. No sun, no fresh air, only the scrape of his claws on steel, and the memory of his own freedom fading like a dream. He escaped by accident, not courage. The latch broke in a storm, and the door swung open. For a long time, he just stood there. He didn't know if he was allowed to leave. He didn't know if he remembered how to. When he finally ran, the storm followed. Now, as he crashed through the woods, one leg bleeding from a fall, he thought maybe he should have stayed. Maybe being caged was better than dying afraid in the rain. The thought clawed at him as violently as the wind. "Keep going," said a voice not far above. It came from a blue heron, wings outstretched, gliding just ahead through the trees. "You're closer than you think." "I can't," Kota cried, slipping again, collapsing into the mud. "I don't even know where I'm going." "You don't need to," the heron said. "You just need to not stop." Kota shut his eyes. Everything in him ached, but something else stirred, quiet but certain. A memory, not of the cage, but of the time before it. The riverbank, the stars, his real name whispered by the wind. He stood. Each step after that was a choice, not a reflex. Not a run away, but a run toward. When the storm began to break and morning broke in faint gold, he found himself at the edge of a clearing, a farm, a porch light, a door already opening. The heron landed beside him, silent now. "Why did you help me?" Coda asked. The heron looked at him for a long time, then said, "Because once, I didn't have anyone to fly ahead of me." Coda turned to the house, trembling but upright. He wasn't healed. Not yet. But he was out of the storm. And this time, he had arrived on his own feet. And just when it seemed like the darkness would win, something changed. 4. The light after the rain. Juno had barely made it to the tree line when her legs gave out. A border collie once raised to herd cattle in open pastures. She was now little more than a ghost of her former self, thin, matted, barely more than breath and bones. For months, she had been kept chained in the dirt yard of a man who had no business owning anything living. Shouted at, starved, forgotten when storms came. The chain dug into her neck like a warning. Don't hope, don't move, don't try. She had stopped barking weeks ago. Not from weakness, but because the silence was easier than the disappointment of no one listening. The rain had loosened the post. Not much, just enough. She hadn't planned to escape. She just moved one night when everything inside her said, "This isn't life." And now here she was, belly pressed to wet ground, heart pounding so loud it echoed in her ears. She wanted to sleep, maybe forever. "Not yet," said a voice above. She looked up. A kestrel stood on a broken fence post, feathers ruffled from the storm, eyes calm like old wind. "You don't see it," the kestrel said, "but you're close." Juno let out a low breath, half growl, half surrender. Close to what? To the place where the pain ends. Not because it's gone, but because you've moved past it. She blinked rain from her lashes. It sounded impossible. The pain was all she knew. The hunger, the cold, the chain of an freedom. It still clung to her like a second skin. But something in the kestrel's tone felt different. Not like hope, more like truth. She got up. Every joint screamed. Mud clung to her fur like a second weight. But she walked. No direction, no plan, just forward. The forest opened up to a narrow road. On the other side, a porch light flickered through the fog. She hesitated. The kestrel flew ahead, then turned to look back. "You've already done the hardest part," it said. "You chose to begin." She crossed. Her paws hit the wooden steps. The door opened. A figure, a woman in boots and a flannel shirt, knelt down. No shouting, no fear, just quiet recognition. Juno didn't move at first. Then, slowly, she stepped forward, rested her head in the woman's hands, and closed her eyes. "You made it," the kestrel whispered from above. Not just out but through. And in that moment, soaked and shaking, Juno understood. Freedom wasn't about distance, it was about finally believing she deserved to be somewhere better. But the journey didn't just end with escape, it led to something far more powerful, understanding. Where the storm ends, freedom didn't arrive with fireworks or fanfare, it came quietly. In the way Juno lay down on a dry porch for the first time, without flinching. It came in the breath she finally took without fear. What she thought was the end of her strength had only been the end of her silence. The storm didn't break her. It showed her the way out. And in that, there's something deeply human, even if Juno wasn't. Sometimes healing isn't dramatic. It's not a sudden leap, but the slow, trembling step forward after you've been knocked down again and again. It's the moment you stop asking for proof that you deserve better and just start walking toward it. Not because you're sure, but because something in you, tired, bruised, but still alive, says, "Try anyway." The kestrel never offered answers, only reminders. That the pain was real, but so was the path. That being broken is not the same as being beyond repair. That freedom isn't always a playsight's the moment you stop believing the cage is all you are. If you've ever felt like Juno, tethered, unseen, forgetting, know this, your storm will pass. You don't have to be ready. You don't have to be strong. You just have to begin. Because sometimes the light isn't something you chase. Sometimes it's something you become, and you remember you were never meant to live small, silent, or afraid. And when you make it through, however slowly, however scared, you won't just be free. You'll be whole.